She was their best friend. For years, Skylar Neese, Rachel Schoaf, and Shalia Eddy were inseparable, the kind of teenage trio that did everything together. But on July 6, 2012, two of those friends lured 16-year-old Skylar into the woods under the pretense of getting high and hanging out. And then, on the count of 3, they attacked her with kitchen knives. They stabbed her over 50 times, covered her body with branches, and went home to tweet about how much they missed her. For months, Rachel and Shalia maintained their grieving best friend act, posting tributes to Skylar on social media, comforting her parents, and even helping search for her, all while knowing exactly where her body was, all while knowing they were the ones who killed her. This is the true story of one of the most chilling murders in recent memory, not because of who the victim was, but because of who the killers were. Because sometimes, the monster isn't a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes, the monster is the best friend who knows all your secrets. And sometimes, the motive is so shallow, so senseless, that it's almost harder to comprehend than the violence itself. This is the story of Skylar Neese, and the two best friends who counted to 3 before taking her life. If you're new here, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. If this content resonates with you, consider leaving a like to help others find these stories. This case involves the murder of a teenager and disturbing betrayal by friends. If you need to step away at any point, please do. Now let's go back to the beginning, to a small town in West Virginia where 3 teenage girls seemed like they'd be friends forever. Morgantown, West Virginia, is a college town, home to West Virginia University. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where high school friendships feel all-consuming, where teenage drama can seem like the entire world. Skylar Neese grew up in Morgantown, the only child of Mary and Dave Neese. By all accounts, she was a bright, funny, ambitious teenager. She got good grades, worked part-time at Wendy's, and had dreams of becoming a criminal lawyer. The irony of that ambition, given what would happen to her, is almost unbearable. Skylar was close with her parents, which isn't always the case with 16-year-olds. She'd text her mom throughout the day, share things with her dad, spend time with them even when she could have been out with friends. But she also had a typical teenage life. She loved social media, particularly Twitter, where she'd post dozens of times a day about everything from school stress to friendship drama to what she was eating for lunch. And the two people she posted about most were her best friends, Rachel Schoaf and Shalia Eddy. The 3 girls had been friends since elementary school, though the dynamic had shifted over the years. Kayla and Skylar were closest first, practically inseparable through middle school. Rachel came into the picture later but quickly became part of their tight-knit group. By high school, they were the kind of trio that seemed unbreakable. They had sleepovers constantly, often sneaking out of their houses late at night to drive around, smoke weed, and talk about boys and drama and all the things teenage girls talk about. They had countless inside jokes. They finished each other's sentences. They posted photos together with captions like best friends forever and sisters not by blood but by choice. But like many intense teenage friendships, theirs had an undercurrent of toxicity that nobody fully recognized at the time. In the months leading up to July 2012, there were signs that the friendship was fracturing. Nothing dramatic, just the typical teenage stuff. Arguments over boys, jealousy over who was closest to whom, the kind of social jockeying that happens when 3 people try to maintain an equal friendship. Skylar had started dating a guy that Shalia didn't approve of. There were rumors that Rachel and Shalia had become closer, leaving Skylar feeling like the third wheel. There was typical high school drama about who said what to whom, who was talking behind whose back. On social media, you could see hints of tension. Subtweeting, those vague posts clearly directed at someone without naming them, became more common. Skylar would post things like "sick of fake friends and you know who you are." Rachel and Shalia would respond with their own cryptic messages. But this seemed normal. Every teenage friendship has drama. Parents and teachers who noticed figured the girls would work it out or drift apart naturally, the way teenage friendships often do. Nobody thought the tension was dangerous. Nobody suspected that Shalia and Rachel were planning something unthinkable. Looking back at their social media posts from June and early July 2012, you can see the planning happening in real time, though it was disguised as normal teenage communication. Messages about hanging out, about going for drives, about one last adventure before summer ended. Skylar had no idea that her 2 best friends were plotting her murder. The night of July 5th going into the early morning hours of July 6th started like many nights had before. Skylar was home with her parents in their ground-floor apartment. Around 10:30 p.m., she told her parents she was going to bed. They said goodnight, and Skylar went to her room. What Mary and Dave Neese didn't know was that Skylar was planning to sneak out. She'd done it before. Lots of teenagers do. She'd climb out her bedroom window, meet up with friends, and sneak back in before her parents woke up. Security footage from a nearby business would later show what happened next. Just before midnight, a car pulled up near the Neese apartment. Skylar climbed out her bedroom window and got into the car. The car drove away. In the car were Shalia Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. They told Skylar they were going to drive out to a spot where they could smoke weed and hang out. Again, this was something they'd done many times before. Skylar had no reason to be suspicious. They drove to a remote area in Pennsylvania, just across the state line from West Virginia. It was a secluded spot in the woods, the kind of place teenagers go when they want privacy. They got out of the car, walked into the woods a bit, and sat down. And then, on a count of 3 that Rachel and Shalia had planned in advance, they attacked. Both girls had brought kitchen knives from their homes. On Shalia's count, 1, 2, 3, they began stabbing Skylar. According to Rachel's later confession, Skylar fought back. She tried to run. She was screaming, asking them why, begging them to stop. But they didn't stop. They stabbed her over 50 times. The attack was frenzied, brutal, sustained. When it was finally over, Skylar Neese was dead in the woods, and her 2 best friends were covered in her blood. After murdering Skylar, Rachel and Shalia didn't panic. They didn't break down or immediately confess. Instead, they methodically covered up what they'd done. They used the dirt and branches around them to cover Skylar's body, creating a makeshift grave. They cleaned themselves up as best they could, changed into spare clothes they brought, and put their bloody clothes in plastic bags. Then they drove back to Morgantown. On the drive home, they got their story straight. If anyone asked, they'd picked up Skylar, driven around for a bit, then dropped her back off at home around 11 p.m. They hadn't seen her after that. They went to their respective homes and went to bed. The next morning, when Skylar's parents discovered she was missing, Rachel and Shalia began what would become months of lying. When Mary and Dave Neese woke up on July 6 and found Skylar's bedroom window open and their daughter gone, they were worried but not immediately terrified. Skylar had snuck out before. She usually came back by morning. But as the hours passed and Skylar didn't come home, didn't answer her phone, didn't respond to texts, their worry escalated to fear. By afternoon, they'd reported her missing. Police began investigating immediately. They talked to Skylar's friends, trying to piece together where she might have gone. Both Rachel and Shalia told the same story. Yes, they'd picked Skylar up the night before, driven around for about an hour, then dropped her back off at home around 11. They had no idea where she'd gone after that. The security footage seemed to contradict this. It showed Skylar getting into the car but never showed her coming back. When confronted with this, the girls adjusted their story slightly. Maybe it was closer to midnight when they dropped her off. Maybe they were remembering the timing wrong. But they insisted they'd brought her home. Police didn't immediately suspect Rachel and Shalia. Why would they? These were Skylar's best friends. They seemed genuinely worried about her, and they had no obvious motive to harm her. As days turned into weeks with no sign of Skylar, the search intensified. Volunteers combed through the woods around Morgantown. Police followed up on every tip. Skylar's parents made desperate pleas on social media and local news, begging for information about their daughter's whereabouts. And through it all, Rachel and Shalia maintained their act. They posted tributes to Skylar on Twitter. They joined search parties. They comforted Skylar's parents. They gave interviews about how worried they were about their missing best friend. Shalia tweeted things like "We need to find her and always hope." Rachel posted about how much she missed Skylar, how she prayed she'd come home safe. It was a performance, and they were chillingly good at it. But as the weeks turned into months, investigators started to notice inconsistencies. The girls' stories didn't always match up. Small details would change. They seemed nervous when questioned, though they attributed that to worry about their friend. More importantly, the security footage bothered detectives. Why would the camera show Skylar leaving but not returning? The timeline didn't make sense. In August, about a month after Skylar disappeared, police administered polygraph tests to both Rachel and Shalia. Both girls failed, spectacularly. This didn't prove they'd killed Skylar. Polygraphs aren't foolproof and aren't admissible in court. But it confirmed what investigators were starting to suspect. Rachel and Shalia knew more than they were saying. The pressure on the girls increased. Police questioned them repeatedly, looking for cracks in their story. Family members started to suspect something was wrong. The community began whispering about the 2 best friends who seemed just a little too calm, a little too composed. But Rachel and Shalia held firm. For months, they maintained their innocence. Skylar had disappeared, and they had no idea what happened to her. That was their story. Meanwhile, Skylar's body remained in the woods in Pennsylvania, decomposing under the branches her killers had piled on top of her. The breakthrough came in December 2012, 6 months after the murder. Rachel Schoaf's lawyer contacted police with a stunning message. Rachel was ready to confess. On December 28, Rachel led police to the remote spot in Pennsylvania where she and Shalia had murdered Skylar. She showed them where they'd hidden the body. She explained how they'd planned it, how they'd carried it out, how they'd covered it up. And when investigators asked the question everyone wanted answered, "Why did you kill her?" Rachel's response was as chilling as the crime itself. They didn't want to be friends with her anymore. That was it. That was the motive. No major betrayal, no serious conflict, no dramatic incident. Rachel and Shalia had simply grown tired of the friendship dynamic. They felt like Skylar was becoming annoying, clingy, that she knew too many of their secrets. So rather than just ending the friendship like normal people, rather than simply distancing themselves, they decided to kill her. Rachel explained that she and Shalia had been planning the murder for months. They'd discussed different methods, different locations. They'd agreed to do it together, on a count of 3, so neither could back out. The planning, the execution, the cover-up, all of it was premeditated. This wasn't a fight that got out of hand or a moment of temporary insanity. This was cold-blooded, calculated murder. On January 3, 2013, police recovered Skylar's remains from the location Rachel had identified. After 6 months in the woods, identification had to be confirmed through dental records. The Neese family finally had confirmation of what they'd feared since July. Their daughter was dead. Rachel Schoaf was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She immediately pleaded guilty, likely as part of a deal for cooperating with investigators. Shalia Eddy was arrested on May 1, 2013, nearly 10 months after the murder. Unlike Rachel, Shalia maintained her innocence. Even with her co-conspirators' detailed confession, even with physical evidence linking her to the crime, Shalia insisted she'd done nothing wrong. But the evidence was overwhelming. Rachel's confession was detailed and consistent. Forensic evidence from the crime scene matched both girls. Cell phone records and social media posts contradicted their original stories. In January 2014, Shalia Eddy finally pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, just days before her trial was set to begin. The sentencing hearings were emotionally devastating. Skylar's parents, Mary and Dave Neese, gave victim impact statements that painted a picture of a vibrant, ambitious, loving teenager whose life was stolen by the two people she trusted most. Rachel Schoaf was sentenced to 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. She was 16 at the time of the murder, and her cooperation with investigators likely influenced her sentence. Shalia Eddy received life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Her refusal to take responsibility, her months of lying, and her lack of remorse all worked against her. Both girls are currently incarcerated in West Virginia. Rachel will be eligible for parole in 2023. Shalia won't be eligible until 2028. During the hearings, neither girl could provide a satisfactory explanation for why they killed Skylar. Psychologists testified about adolescent brain development, about how teenagers sometimes lack the ability to fully grasp consequences, about group dynamics and peer pressure. But none of it really explained how 2 teenage girls could plan and execute the murder of their best friend simply because they didn't want to be her friend anymore. The Skylar Neese case shocked the nation when details became public. It raised uncomfortable questions about teenage friendship, about social media, about how well parents really know what's happening in their children's lives. Mary and Dave Neese became advocates for missing persons and victims' rights. They worked to pass Skylar's Law in West Virginia, which requires authorities to issue Amber Alerts more quickly when teenagers go missing. Previously, Amber Alerts were primarily for younger children, but Skylar's case showed that teenagers in danger need the same rapid response. The case also sparked conversations about the dark side of social media. The fact that Rachel and Shalia had live tweeted their grief while knowing they were Skylar's killers was particularly disturbing to people. It highlighted how social media can be used to craft false narratives, how a carefully curated online presence can hide terrible truths. For University High School and the Morgantown community, the case was traumatic. These weren't strangers or outsiders. These were their kids, teenagers they'd known since elementary school, who seemed normal and well-adjusted, who now would spend decades in prison for murder. Parents everywhere looked at their own teenagers' friendships with new suspicion. Teachers and counselors struggled with how to identify warning signs when the warning signs had been so subtle. How do you distinguish between normal teenage drama and something darker? Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Skylar Neese case is how ordinary the killers were. Rachel and Shalia weren't obviously troubled. They didn't come from abusive homes or have histories of violence. They got decent grades, had other friends, seemed like typical teenagers. Psychologists have studied this case extensively, trying to understand what could motivate such a senseless act. Several factors likely contributed. The intense nature of teenage friendships can create situations where conflicts feel enormous, where the idea of friendship ending seems catastrophic. Rachel and Shalia may have felt trapped in a friendship they no longer wanted but didn't know how to end. Folie à deux, or shared psychosis, where 2 people feed off each other's worst impulses, may have played a role. Neither girl alone might have been capable of murder, but together, they emboldened each other. The teenage brain's underdeveloped prefrontal cortex means teenagers are notoriously bad at understanding long-term consequences. Rachel and Shalia may have been able to plan the murder without fully grasping that this would destroy their own lives as well as Skylar's. Social media's role in teenage identity formation meant that maintaining the appearance of grief, of being good friends, became almost like a game to them. The performance of mourning became divorced from the reality of what they'd done. But ultimately, no psychological explanation fully accounts for the cold calculation required to plan a murder for months, to execute it, and then to lie about it while comforting the victim's grieving parents. Looking back, people have tried to identify warning signs. Were there red flags that could have prevented this? The truth is, the signs were subtle at best. Normal teenage friendship drama that happens in millions of friend groups every day. Conflicts over boys, jealousy, social hierarchy issues, none of it screamed danger. Even the subtweets and vague social media posts that hinted at conflict were typical teenage behavior. Parents and teachers see this all the time and usually, rightfully, don't intervene in minor social disputes. The only real warning sign was the girls' behavior after they failed their polygraph tests, but by then, Skylar was already dead and hidden in the woods. This case is terrifying precisely because it suggests that sometimes there are no warning signs. Sometimes evil can hide behind normalcy so completely that nobody sees it coming. Even with Rachel's detailed confession, even with both girls imprisoned, fundamental questions remain unanswered. How did two 16-year-old girls become capable of such calculated violence? At what point did the idea of murder stop being a thought and become a plan? What were they thinking during those months of planning? Did either of them ever consider backing out? And perhaps most haunting, do they genuinely understand what they did? Do they feel remorse, or do they just regret getting caught? In interviews from prison, Rachel has expressed some remorse, though it's hard to know how genuine it is. Shalia has remained largely silent, refusing most interview requests and maintaining a low profile. Both girls will eventually be eligible for parole. The thought of them walking free someday is unbearable to many people, especially to Skylar's family. But the criminal justice system treats juvenile offenders differently, operating under the belief that teenagers are capable of rehabilitation. Whether Rachel Schoaf and Shalia Eddy can truly be rehabilitated, whether they can ever fully comprehend the enormity of what they did, remains to be seen. The murder of Skylar Neese is one of those cases that stays with you long after you learn about it. Not because of the brutality of the crime, though it was brutal. Not because of the investigative process, though that was compelling. It stays with you because of how close to home it hits. These weren't hardened criminals or psychopaths displaying obvious warning signs from childhood. These were teenagers who seemed normal, who had families and friends and futures ahead of them. They were someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone's classmate, and they committed murder because they didn't want to be friends anymore. The case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about adolescence, about friendship, about the capacity for evil that can exist in the most ordinary-seeming people. It reminds us that sometimes the person most dangerous to you isn't a stranger, it's someone you trust completely. For Skylar's parents, the tragedy is compounded by the fact that they welcomed Rachel and Shalia into their home countless times. They trusted these girls with their daughter. They never imagined that the sleepovers and hangouts and late-night adventures would lead to their daughter's murder. The Skylar Neese case changed how we think about teenage friendship, about the warning signs of violence, about the dark potential of social media to disguise true intentions. It led to legislative changes and sparked important conversations about missing persons protocols. But most importantly, it reminds us to cherish the people we love, to pay attention to the relationships in our lives, and to never take for granted that tomorrow is guaranteed. Skylar Neese should have graduated high school, gone to college, become the lawyer she dreamed of being. Instead, she's a name on a headstone, a victim of a crime so senseless that even years later, we're still struggling to make sense of it. Thank you for watching this difficult case. If you found this coverage respectful and informative, please subscribe to the channel and consider sharing this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments, but please remember that Skylar was a real person with a family who still grieves her loss every day. Be respectful in your discussions. If this case affected you, I encourage you to reach out to someone. Talk about what you're feeling. Process it. And if you're a parent of teenagers, maybe use this as an opportunity to have an honest conversation about friendship, about conflict resolution, about the importance of choosing friends wisely. Until the next case, stay safe. And remember, the people closest to you should be the ones you trust most. When that trust is betrayed, when friendship becomes dangerous, the results can be devastating. Rest in peace, Skylar Neese. You deserved so much better.